welcome to another episode of the Stripping the Dipping podcast. You're joined by your usual co-host, Mr. AMG. It's AMG Dens, and what can I say? We're so thankful to all our listeners joining into the show. If you're new, welcome aboard. We like to talk about the world of motorsport and to discover every single thing, from the nuts and bolts that go on the wheels, to the contract deals and exclusive stuff behind the scenes. And, today is no different because we have a really special guest today. We're very honored because she basically is the royalty of the F1 Paddock Club and has so much vast experience and, a really huge campaign that she's part of, which we really want to, address further in this episode. So everybody here, make sure that you give a wild kind of clap and a support, as always, for our guest. It's Kate Beavan. Kate, how are you doing today?
Dens, wow, what an intro. How can I live up to that? That's very kind of you, by the way. What a nice introduction that is.
Oh, why, thank you, Kate. And honestly, it's an honor as well because, Georgie obviously lines me up with all of the kind of information about our guests, and I'll go away and do some research. But Kate, you've been in such a unique kind of position where you've seen, Formula One as a sport grow and kind of touch the hearts of many as such. And it's really interesting just to be able to sit down with you today and to go through some of those early memories, but also some of the new things that you've been working on, which is quite pivotal. And of course, as well, just some really interesting stories as well, Kate. So without further ado, Kate, would you like to kind of give our audience a bit of a insight into who you are and what you've done? Because, if you haven't realized by now, guys, this is the legendary Kate Beavan, which was the ex-director of hospitality and experiences for the F1 Paddock Club. So, for all of your suave, like celebrities and stuff like that, Kate was the person behind the force, making those experiences and also doing a lot of the high-profile commercial deals as well in terms of F1 branding and, us even having like an F1 roller coaster in Abu Dhabi, for example, with the trademarks and stuff. So, Kate, I'll give you the floor. Tell us more about yourself and just how it all began.
Well, you've bigged me up a bit there, Denzi. I have to tell you, I think you ought to realise I started out, 30 years ago as a single parent with no money and no prospects and a baby to look after. So and failed all my initial A levels. So, if you ever want anyone to understand that you can fuck up and it will be okay, then I'm your man. I have been working in Formula One since the mid-90s. I think 96 was when I started. I originally qualified as a lawyer. I worked for a Formula One team called Arrows. And that all went bust in the early 2000s. And then I got a phone call from Bernie Ecclestone. He asked me to come and join him. And funny thing is, I said no.
Wow.
I said no 3 times. By then, I kind of had enough of Formula One because I'd had a rough time at Arrows. The end of Arrows, when it went bust, was quite tough, actually. And it was kind of depressing, and I thought, I'll go and do something else. So when Bernie phoned me, I said no. And I think he thought it was a negotiating tactic because, he phoned me again and then phoned me again and said, we'll just come and have a cup of tea with me in London. So I went down to see him in London, had a cup of tea. And he is such a charmer. He is, I'd do anything for that man. He's such a charmer. He talked me into it, and so I joined. Of course, looking back now, I look at myself and I go, "You said no 3 times. Are you mad?" But at the time, it seemed like a sensible thing to do, to say, "I'll go and do something else." But in retrospect, of course, what a brilliant decision. So I worked for Bernie from 2003. In lots of commercial roles. I moved away from being a lawyer and more into just more fun. Lawyers sit at the back end of every deal. They let other people go and do the deal, and then they have to write it up. And there's no fun in that, really. There's a bit of fun in it. So I moved into commercial roles with Bernie, and it was brilliant from 2003 to 2016, 17, when Liberty came in 2017. And they came in completely different ownership and ownership style. And they asked us what we wanted to do. Those of us, who were there in management positions. Because when Liberty bought Formula One, they hadn't been able to speak to, they hadn't been allowed to speak to any of the management there. So they didn't know what we did, and with Bernie, you didn't really have job titles. So they just kind of had this list of people, but they didn't know who they were. They'd never spoken to them before, and they didn't know what they did. So they kind of, one by one, sat us down and talked to us and said, who are you? What do you do? And what do you want to do? And I asked them if I could be the director of hospitality and experiences, because it was a project I started with Bernie not long before they came in. And they very graciously said that I could do that. I thought, that's great, good. So I stayed there until 2021. I left in 2021, at the end of 2021, so that I could set up on my own and start doing a few things that I wanted to do. So I now have my own advisory company, and I advise any companies or investors who want to come into Formula One and don't know how to do it, because it's quite messy, and it can be a bit, if you don't know Formula One, you can get a bit lost with who does what. So I advise entities who are in Formula One or who want to come into Formula One how to do it and how to do it well. And then I have some projects as well. One of my projects is More Than Equal, which is a not-for-profit foundation set up by David Coulthard, who I've known for many years, and his friend, Carol Komarek, who none of your listeners will have heard of, but they will soon. He's won the UK National Lottery rights, so he'll be running the UK National Lottery soon. He's a philanthropist, and he teamed up with David to set up More Than Equal. And More Than Equal only has one aim, and that is to find a woman and put her on the top of the podium in Formula One. We are going to find and develop a female Formula One world champion. And that is a project I am very much in love with right now. So sorry, Dens, is that the hour up now?
Not quite, Kate, not quite. But again, I'm actually very happy that you touched on a lot of the subjects that we were going to go through today, Kate, because it's just fascinating just to hear that timeline and just to kind of see from the beginning, that almost kind of not knowing where to go, how to start, what life was going to really entail for you, to then kind of, the hardships of working for Arrows, which, for the 90s and earlier kind of generation of F1 fans, you remember the Arrows livery with the orange on it as well, and the likes of Jos Verstappen and Damon Hill, and there's lots of drivers that drove for them, and just, your interactions with Bernie leading up all the way through your career, and then the great work that you do now. So, in fact, we'll pull the handbrake here and we'll actually talk about this new campaign that you've just mentioned, More Than Equal. So it sounds like a really exciting venture, of course, as well, to have David Coulthard, Scotland's finest, behind the drive of that as well. It sounds really interesting, because as far as I kind of know about David as well, not only, was he a really prominent driver with McLaren and obviously Red Bull as well, but today he's still out there kind of working with a lot of younger drivers, helping to develop them and to help them, realize their potential as such. So to hear him embark on a kind of venture like this with yourself and other people as well is really cool. But the question to ask you, Kate, is, what are the biggest challenges involved in trying to find the first female Formula One champion? And how can our listeners get involved as such as well?
Oh, that's a great question, Dan. Can I ask you a question first? How long have you been? Have you been following Formula One since you were a kid?
Honestly, Kate, I've been watching it listening to it, at least since I was in my mother's womb in 95. It was just one of those things, Kate, where on a Sunday.
You've been around it as long as I have, with the same kind of, timeline
Yeah, same fiber, of course, and I remember kind of like growing up in the 90s and seeing like, the Coulthards, the Michael Schumachers, the John Alesi's, Murray Walker, God bless his soul as well on the commentary. And even back then, Formula One was such a magical kind of like experience just in a living room, with my dad watching, all the cars racing each other. But then, to kind of see how Formula One's grown over the years and to see the push now in, other series to kind of have like, people from either less represented backgrounds or people who don't get the opportunity to finally break the mold and to be the first, I think super exciting.
It is really exciting, and that's what More Than Equal is all about. Now, with David, it's personal, and he has a very personal. He's very, very genuine, authentic guy, David, and his sister. His sister Lindsay was. He will tell you this. His sister Lindsay went karting when he was a kid. They both went karting, and he says now his sister was as good, if not better, than he was. Right, when they were at kids karting, and he feels, and yet he was the one who gets pushed all the way up to Formula One, and he feels that. He feels the kind of injustice of that. It's not that it was anyone's fault; it was the way it was at the time. But that was then, and this is now. It's a different world, and it's just mad, isn't it? Isn't it mad that you've got women who can run. You've got women running countries. They've gone to space. They're in the army. They're in fighter jets, right? And a woman hasn't been anywhere near racing in Formula One for nearly 50 years. How isn't that crazy?
It's shameful, Kate. It's a real indictment, on what the sport has allowed itself to become in a way. And I think it's been time. It's been quite a while, and it's been brewing that these conversations are need to be had, and steps are being needed to be taken to enforce the right measures to facilitate the next not just one kind of female driver or female driver to win the world championship, but like the next generation of them to kind of go in and
yeah, exactly, because we say we are all about finding and developing a woman driver to become a Formula One world champion. That's only one woman, right? But of course, by doing that, you are carving a path for hundreds of others behind them. And do you know what? What's really interesting about this, Dan, is the old stereotypes that lived for years. Women aren't strong enough. Women aren't competitive enough, right? That one makes me laugh a lot. Women don't have the temperament, or they don't have the psychology, or they don't have the neck strength, or whatever it is. Nobody buys into those anymore. The new fan base, we surveyed them as part of our research. We just did the biggest piece of research that's ever been done on women in motorsport. And we put those stereotypes out there. And the new fan base, I think everyone calls them the kind of Drive to Survive fan base. The new fans of the sport don't buy into that, just like young people don't buy into any of that rubbish, those kind of stereotypes now, right? So then you've got to ask yourself, well, if it isn't that, if it isn't mental or strength or technical skills or whatever, what is it? What is it stopping girls from progressing in motorsport? And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to identify what those barriers are, and we've begun to identify them. So it's things like there's no dedicated training program for elite female drivers, right? I'll just let that sink in for a minute. If you went to any other sport, if you went to athletics or tennis or football, there's a different training regime you go through. Take an Olympic sport like athletics. You wouldn't train a 14-year-old boy the same way you train a 14-year-old girl, would you? You'd have a separate training program. But there isn't one in Formula One, so we're going to build one. We're putting that together now, and we're going to be able to launch it by next year, right? Because we've all seen with the rise of women's sport, women's bodies are different. Everything about it, the psychology is different, the nutrition, the hormones, the physicality, all of that, different injuries they're getting in football now, women get to men. You need to build a dedicated training and development program around and for women drivers. So that's what we're going to do. And that's one thing that hasn't been there before. The other thing that's not there is enough girls. There aren't enough girls going karting. And why aren't there enough girls going karting? Because parents don't take them, because they don't ask their parents to go. And when they do go, and I think this will, this is really important, culturally, the sport can be a bit intimidating and not very welcoming of women and girls. And I think that's a really powerful deterrent. And I think if you go into any sport as a woman into a male sport, to not feel welcomed by the sport when you're that young is not a good thing, is it? To feel excluded, to feel that, there aren't even any girls' toilets at this, kart track or changing facilities, or, that you feel not welcome. And I don't think that's a good look for any sport, is to exclude anyone and make anyone feel unwelcome in their sport. So there's quite a lot to do, but we are working on it.
That's so reassuring to hear, Kate. And I think, like you mentioned as well, it's so key that at even the foundational levels, like you mentioned, parents being able to educate their kids and to culturally have that, conversation with them that, anything a man could do, a woman could do, if not better, and growing up as a kid as well, my biggest idol was always my mom, because she was the one that always made the sacrifices. She was the one that always left herself undone. She's the one that, sacrificed her quality of life to give me a better life and, the rest of our family a better life as well. So, it shouldn't be kind of like a glass ceiling or any kind of prejudice against women in today's world, when it comes to the challenges and hurdles that come into it. And, I'm really relieved, but also excited just to kind of see that, the work that you guys are doing as part of More Than Equal is putting the foundations in place to make sure that, women, the next kind of female world champion, the next kind of elite kind of female driver in the sports will have the backing and have the facilities and the training and all the equal opportunities, kind of as a kin to the name, to be able to do that. Because I think in life, everybody deserves a chance, and
that's right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And if to see young girls who, if you've ever seen, and this is something that you and anyone who's listening can do to help, because I often get asked, what can you do to help? And I go, if you can train elite athletes, come and help us. But apart from that, what you can do is go on social media, find some young female racing talent and support them, follow them, and, get everyone to follow them. Give them a bit of social media love and support, because they find it tough out there and it can be quite lonely for them. But there are some brilliant, young, talented female racers out there, and they just need everyone to get behind them. It's an expensive sport, isn't it, Dan? It's not like picking up a football and kicking it around. Well, it's not easy to get into. You've got to find a kart track. You've got to pay to go karting. But those girls that I've seen who are out on track doing it, they fall in love with it. They are really good at it. And yet, all along the way, one barrier after another is put in their place. And I've talked in Formula One, I've talked to Formula One teams, and I've talked to senior people in Formula One, and they say, quite rightly, well, Formula One team, we don't care. If you deliver us a female who can beat everyone else on track, if you find us a girl who can beat Max Verstappen, we'll take them every day of the week. And they kind of go, so you see, we're not, we have no prejudices. You kind of go, yeah, okay, that's great. But it sort of misses the point. The point is they're not getting anywhere near there for you to make that selection. No good you saying, hey, it's okay. If you get there, we'll welcome you. What about making it a little bit more equal in getting there in the first place? We're not there to make it easy for girls. We're just there to make it equally difficult for girls. And at the moment, they have all these additional barriers that are just unfair.
It's so true, Kate. And like you mentioned as well, it's so easy for us in a way, but I think people forget the kind of advantages and almost the powers they have just in a mobile phone to go and show support, go and follow, go and interact, and to help kind of these younger women who are pursuing a career in motorsports and being a driver and becoming the next great athlete. And, it doesn't cost anything to us. So I think more of us should be doing that as well. But at the same time, there's a balance in that too, in terms of like guys not being creepy and, just being respectful towards women as well, and showing them the same respect that, you would give to a male competitor as well. So I think it's super key, and I think a lot of people's eyes are being open to the change. And I'm glad that the fight hasn't started yet. It's only just begun, but in a sense, we're already seeing the likes of like Jamie Chadwick in the Indie NXT series, like having the opportunity to take on the guys, and she's doing extremely well with that. In the sports car racing scene as well, we've got like the Iron Dames, which again, you've got the likes of Michelle Gatting and a lot of other drivers as well, trying to bridge the gap and showing that if women are given the same platforms and same opportunities and investment and quality and time and love, that they can produce the results and be just as outstanding as all the guys that people get behind as well, Kate. So I 100% agree with you, and I implore all of our listeners as well to kind of get behind the campaign, to check out More Than Equal, and of course as well, like if any people with expertise, of course send them in the way of More Than Equal. But even from just your own individual kind of perspective as well, make sure you follow them, and like Kate has mentioned as well, go and check out all the female talent out there, because there's really no shortage. That I can definitely assure people, Kate. So I'm very thankful that we addressed this, and we'll circle back to it as well, because it'd be interesting to contrast kind of the foundation we've based it in some of the other topics we'll discuss, Kate. But kind of going back to you, because you're our star of the show. Like, Kate, talk to us more about just like your earlier days. So you qualified as a lawyer and then shortly began working for Tom Walkinshaw, which, if people don't know, huge kind of influence in the world of motorsport racing. And I think you ran F2 and F3 teams before investing into Arrows. Kate, how did you make that kind of jump from like the legal world, working for Arrows? What was the kind of connection there, and also how would you describe your time there? I know that towards the end, as it is with most teams, that financially don't kind of like survive the hot climate that is Formula One. It can get tricky. But what were the earlier experiences that you experienced there working for Arrows, and talk about the time there as well for us?
Well, how it happened was this. So I was a lawyer in private practice, newly qualified. And one of my first clients was Tom Walkinshaw, but not on the racing side of the business. Tom Walkinshaw used to own a whole load of luxury car dealerships in the south of England. He had about 30 dealerships, all different makes and marks of cars, going all the way up the M40. And he used to buy and sell these dealerships, right? So you would sell one dealership, BMW in High Wycombe, and you'd buy another 2 dealerships elsewhere. So there was a lot of churn going on in building up his empire. And my job in private practice as a lawyer, I specialized in buying and selling car dealerships, because I did one job for him, one car dealer, then I did 2, then I did 3, then I did 4, and suddenly I was the expert. So I ended up doing so much work for him that I think he got a bit peed off with it. And he said, I don't know why I'm paying the law firm all this money. So he said, come and work for me. He had one lawyer working for him at the time, and Alistair Mitchell, a great man. And he gave me my first break, Alistair. And he approached me and said, come and work for us. Tom wants you to come and work for us so he doesn't have to pay the law firm fees anymore. And it didn't take me long to decide to do that, because it just looked like more fun working in a company than in a law firm, if I'm being honest about it. So I did. That's exactly how it happened, and I went and joined them. And it was only after that, after I joined, that he decided, or got the deal to buy Arrows. Because of course, if you remember, he was technical director of Benetton at the time, before he had Arrows, wasn't he? He was technical director of Benetton when Schumacher was there with Flavio. And he quite fancied not being a technical director anymore, but having his own team. So he went and bought the Arrows Formula One team from Jackie Oliver, and that was one of the first jobs I worked on when I was at Arrows. at TWR, which then bought Arrows, and I had an absolute great time there. It was brilliant. Tom was great to work for. He was very much like Bernie. He had racing in his bones. I mean, there are some team owners who just live and breathe racing. It is who and what they are. They are not in there to make a fortune. They're not in there as managers. They are there because they love racing, and that was Tom. He had racing through and through him, and he had very high standards, and he had a bit of a bad temper, so very, very like Bernie. And it was really good working for him, and we had some great years there. You've already alluded to it, that wonderful orange Arrows livery. I mean, the cars were beautiful then, and I may be a bit biased, but I thought they were beautiful back then. So I loved the Arrows cars. Yeah, so I had a great time, and I learned a lot about Formula One that I didn't know because I wasn't a Formula One fan. I didn't know anything about Formula One at all. In fact, even now I'm not that much of a fan, so don't ask me any difficult questions. I love the business of Formula One. I really love the business of Formula One because you're just surrounded by people who are at the top of their game, which is really good, isn't it? Because you hope that it'll make you a bit better. So I love being in the environment. It's fast-paced. It's full of really, really smart people, and it's exciting to be in. But I'm not that fussed about sport, frankly. I love business more than I love sport, and I love live events. I don't think you can beat a live event, whether it's a Formula One event, or whether it's a World Cup final, or whether it's Glastonbury. There is something magical about a live event, isn't there? About when people come together, and there's something joyous and wonderful about a whole group of people coming together for something.
I would absolutely agree there, Kate. And it's true, when we talk about, like you mentioned, Glastonbury, which this year was phenomenal because there's so many different acts on top of that as well. Elton John kind of doing his last show, and just to see how much that meant to people in that moment, how people were cherishing it and kind of like living in that moment, it really goes to show that, these experiences are like almost one in a lifetime. And, in terms of Formula One, like you mentioned, it's such a clinical and technical sport. And often the engineers, if they weren't engineering a race car or helping like the team win, they'd be, I don't know, working out probably the next like life-saving medicine, or working out the latest kind of ventilators in a university hospital. Like, there's so many things that like the world of Formula One has done to kind of like help the acceleration and development of so many different key areas around the world as well, even in terms of finance, entertainment, and just the commercial aspect of it as well, which is a great segue, Kate, because then, we've got the one and only Mr. Bernie himself. In 2003, Mr. Ecclestone asked you to come along with him and to kind of take that next step forward in terms of the running of Formula One and the commercial aspect of it as well. And I know you kind of talked about it in the intro, okay, but come on, tell us, give us a bit more of a description of what Bernie's like, because even this as a kid growing up and watching him on the TV, he seemed like such a character, when he was like, running behind the team principals and pulling pranks on them, or like, his funny ideas about putting a water sprinkler on the track, just to catch the drivers out, and all the other kind of like funny Bernieisms that Bernie was known for doing. Kind of, what was he like to work with as a character? And did he have a particular vision or a type of business marketing opportunity that he kind of brought forward to you at the time when he approached you?
I'll tell you what, Dan, that most people don't appreciate. People who know him do, but most people don't appreciate. He had the most wicked sense of humour. He really did have he had a real dry sense of humour, a really dry. He was deadpan, So sometimes you'd have to look twice and say, was that, did he just say something very funny? Because he'd be completely deadpan. And yeah, you're right. He loved pranks as well. He was really, really good to work for, in his own special way. So the thing is about Bernie, and he's very misunderstood, I think. And of course he's completely cocked up on some things, and he knows it, and but mainly people people don't understand is they misunderstand him. Bernie just had very, very high standards. Bernie, I never saw him or experienced him do anything other than do it well. He wanted and he expected that from everyone. So he had very, very high standards, and he kind of got shitty with people if they didn't live up to them, right? And I think that's where he got his reputation for being a bit fierce, and he was fierce, you know. But he had very high standards, and he was smart. He was just so smart. It would be like me playing chess with a grandmaster. You know, there are some people who can just see 3, 4, 5 steps ahead. Right, so they know where this is going, whatever it is, you know, it's the industry or a particular deal or whatever. But having that chess-like brain that allows you to anticipate every move as it goes, as you go on, is really special. And he was just smart. He had smarts, you know, and he was, you know, he had street smarts as well. He knew people. He could read people. Right, so he knew, you know, if you were trying to get one over on him, or, you know, and he was fierce, but he was fierce in the right way. I think he was fierce in pursuit of the way he saw Formula One. Formula One for him was not about, you know, hay bales around the track and having fun and amateur gentleman races. He turned it into a multi-billion-dollar business. He turned it into a luxury lifestyle business. He made it, you know, he made it what it is today. He made it aspirational. And I think he had that vision way before any other sport did. He professionalized Formula One. I mean, there was hospitality in Formula One before there was luxury hospitality in any other sport. You know, he pioneered in so many ways. Remember, he brought in digital TV in the late 90s. Do you remember Bernie TV? He brought in digital TV in the 90s. And people now go, what do you mean digital TV? All TV is digital. Well, you know, no, it wasn't. There used to be 4 channels on TV. But he brought in digital interactive TV in the late 90s, right? That's you know, 15 years before you get, you know, Netflix and all of that. So he was a pioneer, and he did have vision, but I think he was a bit misunderstood by people.
I agree with you, Kate, and it's interesting, you know, because I think, like you said, for someone like you who worked with him, you really got to kind of understand the kind of DNA and the calisthenics of that man, and you know how his brain operated, how he was able to see opportunity. You know, you talked about Formula One being such a fierce business, and I really want our listeners to take that in as well, because you know, it's about negotiating, it's about doing what's right, not necessarily to make the most money, but what's right for the sport, you know, as a going concern, you know, and to get the right deal, the right options, the right decisions at all costs. So I completely agree with you, you know, and if you're talking about Formula One being a multi-billion-pound conglomerate, which, you know, touches the world in so many ways, more than one, you know, to kind of pioneer some of the earliest kind of innovations and some of the stuff that, you know, today we take granted for, it's really, you know, interesting to hear and to learn about more. So, you know, it's interesting that you mentioned that, Kate, and also your kind of remit was quite broad as well, working under Bernie, and you know, you worked on various high-profile deals as well and commercial opportunities for, you know, our lay people out there as well. Being a law graduate myself, you know, with Formula One, there's so much trademark and intellectual property law, licensing, you know, that comes into it as well. I also understand that, you know, there was an idea at one stage to kind of like get Formula One into theme parks, which again, now I think, you know, when you look at the Middle East, it's almost common practice to have like a Ferrari branded roller coaster or, you know, of such in all of the facilities that are around. So, okay, give us more of an insight into the world of that, and kind of like, you know, what kind of partnership or business deal did you get most excited about during your time working under Bernie's kind of like structure?
Well, I mean, there were lots and lots of deals we did. Some, like the theme parks, never actually happened, but they were really fun to negotiate. And they were tricky, but that was fun. But the ones that stand out for me, there's two that stand out for me, James. There's two. And they're completely different. And they're at the opposite ends of my time with Bernie as well. The first one was when, I think it was 2004, when a guy came into our office and called Andrew Denford. He came into the office to see Bernie and me. Well, Bernie dragged me in. And the guy said, well, I've got this project that I'm doing at the moment, and it's where I get school kids to form a little team and build a model car using Formula One kind of techniques to build a model car. So, aerodynamics and all of that. And then they're powered by a CO2 canister, and we race them, and we'll see which team of school kids wins. And we kind of listened to this. He said, hey, I've got a few schools in the UK are doing this, and it's really popular. He said, I want to brand it Formula One. I want to call it F1. And you own the trademark, Bernie. So, I need a license from you to do it. And Bernie was like, okay. That's good. It's good to get kids interested in Formula One. How much is there? Are you going to pay me? Andrew said, no, of course I can't pay you because I don't think there's any money in it. And these kids haven't got any money. Oh, okay. Anyway, we talked about it with Bernie afterwards, and we did the license deal with F1 in schools, and we called it F1 in schools. And it started with a few schools in the UK where they could enter, and they put together a team of kids. You design the car, and you do all the marketing as well. You design the car. You have to get a kid who can design the car using computer-aided design, computer-aided manufacturing software, which we would donate to the school. You needed a kid to go, and you needed a team member to go and raise sponsorship. You needed somebody who was good at design and art to design the car, the livery of the car, so that you could sell sponsorship. You needed somebody to do a bit of merchandising. You needed somebody to do all of your PR for you. And you needed to raise sponsorship money for this car because you'd have to travel to the finals. So you needed to raise sponsorship to pay for your petrol money. And if you got into the world finals, you needed to pay to go. So this started off with just a few schools in the UK. And that was in 2004. Fast forward now, it's the biggest school-age STEM challenge in the world. I think it's something like nearly 30,000 schools taking part across the world. And this is all about getting kids excited and interested in STEM subjects, science, technology, engineering, and maths. But they're really good. So that's great. And I loved that program because there was nothing better than to see young kids get excited. When you're a kid, you're not that excited, I think, most of the time by maths and maybe science and technology. But you wrap it up with Formula One, it suddenly makes it interesting, right? And that's the power of Formula One. It's the power of a lot of sport. But it allowed boring subjects to become interesting to kids. And the best thing about it, it disproportionately attracted girls. And we didn't design it that way. But what we found over the years was a higher proportion of girls were entering than represented in the school population. So we were attracting more girls into Formula One, but also into science and technology careers. And it was brilliant to see. And I think it's the only time I'll admit to having almost a tear in my eye. In fact, I did have a tear in my eye. We had the world finals in Singapore. Not in Singapore, we had them in Malaysia. I think it was the last year of the Malaysian race, Kuala Lumpur. And Formula One in schools, F1 in schools had taken over a hotel, and they had the finals running there. It all takes place over a few days because you have to judge the kids on lots of different things. How fast is their car, and then how good is their design, and how good is their sponsorship, how good is their marketing. So they get judged on all these different things, which allows it to be like a real teamwork. It's not just the technical kids who are good. They all have to be good. So they do these finals. And then you have an award ceremony. And I was at the award ceremony, and I was, honoured to be allowed to present one of the awards. So I presented one of the awards, and I can't remember what it was. I think it was marketing. And it was a team of girls, from a village in Lebanon, I think. And they had never been outside their village before.
Wow.
these girls, never been outside their village. And there they were in a swanky hotel in Kuala Lumpur picking up an award. And, it made me cry. I spoke to them afterwards and they said, you know what, this has been amazing. We now want to go to university. We're applying to go to university. And they said, without this, we kind of thought we were just going to get married and that would be it, stay in our village. And isn't that amazing? It's just such an amazing story of how you can really make a difference and change people's lives. And that's Formula One doing good, right? That's Formula One really doing some good. And I love that project. And it's still going now. So if anyone's got kids at school, get the school to go and find out about F1 in schools and they can put a team together and join. It's a really good project. The other deal, Dems, which is in my mind, completely opposite of the spectrum to that. And the opposite side, end of my time at Formula One was when Liberty first came in 2017. I think the first deal they signed was a deal that I put in front of them, that I'd been working on actually with Bernie before that, I'd been working on. And that was F1 Experiences. And F1 Experiences was an idea that was hatched way back in, I think, 2012, 2014, when we were first going to the States, right? When we went to Austin. Was that 2012 or 14? I can't remember, Dan.
It was about that region. I think you're spot on with that.
Yeah. So it's about then. And I needed to find somebody to help sell hospitality in the States because we haven't been there for a long time. So I found, I got a recommendation to an agency called Quint Events in the States and met up with them and said, yep, can you help me sell hospitality? Yep, of course we can. We've got a lot of client base in the States. And it was a relationship that worked really, really well. And the guy who founded Quint Events, a guy called Brian Lurst, I sat down with him at the first Austin Grand Prix. And we sat there looking at it and we were saying, do you know what? Wouldn't it be absolutely brilliant if you could build a program so that everyone, I mean, even people who are just buying grandstand tickets could get to see behind the rope a bit, who could get to see a little bit behind the scenes, who could maybe go and tour and see a garage or the pit lane or a paddock, to see a little bit, because the fans of Formula One who go to races, they love the sport. And it's exciting to sit in the grandstands and watch a race, but wouldn't they love to be able to have the option to be able to go a little bit behind the scenes and have a look? And we talked about it for a few years, actually, and we eventually developed it into F1 Experiences, which is all about that. It's about giving fans the opportunity to pay a bit extra, but it's not a huge amount extra, but pay a bit extra and be able to get some real behind the scenes. Meet and greet a driver, go down the paddock, go and see Pirelli and how the tyres work, go down the pit lane. And that was all geared up and ready to go. And Liberty came in and great, brilliant. We signed it, I think, within a couple of months of Liberty first coming in the door. And the first time we ran it was in Barcelona in 2017. And I think we had 20 clients for F1 Experiences who bought a grandstand ticket and had upgraded to a bit of a behind the scenes thing, right? And that was 2017. I think now, where are we, 2023? Now it's 100 million turnover business. And
Wow.
just been bought by Liberty. So, it just shows, doesn't it? It's how fast this business is growing.
Oh, absolutely, Kate. When we look at Formula One, just the growth of it's been exponential over the last couple of years. And like you mentioned as well, it comes down to things like, even just the Netflix series, which gives people like an insight and kind of like a fly on the wall experience of what it's like to be in a garage. And then, even just the actual real life, tangible experience of having the opportunity to opt into the F1 experience package. And okay, I actually share something with you. This weekend that just went by was the first time I had ever been to a real life motorsport race before in person. I'd always wanted to go. Unfortunately, like my dad never had the time to take me. So my girlfriend was like, Dens, you will go to a race at some point. By force, I'm going to take you. And it was at Brands Hatch as part of the British GT Touring Car Championship. So we went there and thankfully my girlfriend had known one of the drivers, so we had got like a paddock pass. And in a similar way you mentioned, Kate, just the ability for me as a fan to go behind the garage, to like speak to the engineers, to actually see the car, like, you know, within touching distance, to, you know, speak to the drivers and to ascertain certain questions that I'd always been fascinated and curious about. You know, watching kind of like a celebrity or athlete on TV and then seeing them in real life is such a kind of like experience, which no matter how much money you put on that, like it's almost like priceless in terms of what that memory does for you and what that connection does for you and atmosphere and just the entire kind of like, you know, experience. So I can completely, you know, see how this would have been an amazing idea and how you helped to kind of like materialize it with Liberty back in 2017. And then, you know, to go back to the earlier opportunity or kind of deal you helped construct as well, that's major in terms of like F1 in schools and the idea of having kind of like, you know, kids in school, you know, trying to, you know, prepare them for like the world of the sciences, technologies, the engineering and maths aspects of it, and giving them the responsibilities. And it draws a lot of parallels with running a successful Formula One team and having, you know, the mechanical masterminds that can do the engineering side, having, you know, the people that are good with the marketing side and are able to kind of attract new sponsors. And I think that is incredible. It's really, really, really phenomenal that the program was able to, you know, grow from like such an early idea into something now that's in 30,000 different schools and giving kind of like children that wouldn't necessarily have the opportunity, you know, to become something which they've always dreamed of. It's really amazing, Kate. And I think just like in the time that you worked in F1, the landscape has really grown. Like it's really remarkable to see how things have kind of moved on from that kind of point and continue to expand.
But you know what, Dan's, look at those two deals, and they're kind of like those are two deals. Both of those deals are very, very close to my heart. Mm-hmm. One of them was worth millions and millions and millions to the business, right? And the other didn't make any money, obviously. It was F1 in schools, right? But they both contributed. That's the point, isn't it? You know, it's not one or the other. People think that, and Formula One is all about money. I mean, because it costs a lot to operate in Formula One, and there's a lot at stake. You know, points mean prizes. You know, sure. Points mean cold hard cash. You know, and there's a lot of money at stake in Formula One. But it's not just about the money, is it? It's not just about the money. And I know that sounds a bit soft, but it isn't. It's about communicating the passion that people in the sport have outside of that sport and doing something with it. You know, doing something that is going to hopefully make some difference to people's lives. And, you know, I think Formula One gets a bit of a bad rap sometimes for being, sustainability. It gets a bad rap for sustainability. You know, actually, Formula One didn't invent the hybrid engine, but Formula One certainly accelerated the development of the hybrid engine when it was brought into Formula One, right? And this is where Formula One contributes for sustainability. You know, the way that Formula One accelerated the development of the hybrid engine, you could say that it was directly responsible for taking tons and tons and tons and tons of carbon out of the atmosphere that would otherwise be in there with the, you know, normal internal combustion engine. So, you know, Formula One does contribute. I just think it hasn't been framed very well. It hasn't been, funnily enough, Formula One hasn't marketed itself very well.
Well, it's ironic that you should mention that, kid, because I agree with you. You know, in terms of F1, it's always been seen as the pinnacle of engineering, and you know, you're talking about the sport working on itself to become sustainable. I think it's still one of the leaders when it comes to sustainability because, even in recent times, we've gone to the hybrid engine, like you mentioned. This year, or I believe it was last year, they introduced the biofuels. So now we have E10 fuel, which has 10% ethanol. And then, of course, with that, 90% ethanol, and then 10% of the rest of the fuel is made up of biodegradable synthetic kind of composites, which are then mixed into the fuel to make it more sustainable, which obviously helps the environment a long way. This season as well, they've had a huge emphasis on the tires. Obviously, Pirelli ship around the world a whole group of tires that get used in the practice sessions, qualifying sessions in the race. And what they've done to the teams is kind of like reshuffle the way they use the tires. So now that the way the approach is, less tires are being used, which is great, because it means less of a carbon footprint in terms of transporting those tires. And on top of that as well, even with a tire, they use the tires for the race, etc. And then when it comes to giving those tires back to Pirelli, there's only so much they could probably do with what's left of the carcass of the tire that remains, and kind of obviously breaking it down into the elements and recycling it into something new. So Formula One's always, I think, had that kind of key eye for trying to be sustainable and trying to make the difference in the world, and taking the technology from what is essentially a prototype car and feeding that into the daily road cars that you and I drive as well. So I think with time, more people will build that understanding, and of course, like you said, the marketing aspect of that as well, and how that's sold to people, I think is something which over time will become better and people will gain more of an understanding as well. So it's really key.
Yeah. But one of the biggest areas of carbon footprint, the two big areas of carbon footprint for Formula One are the travel and the wind tunnels. Mm-hmm. I mean, the amount of energy a wind tunnel takes to run is absolutely crazy. So the more and more you reduce by regulation, the amount of time that the teams are allowed to test and develop in the wind tunnels, the more environmentally friendly you can be. And don't forget, working on a completely new synthetic fuel that will come in, right? That won't put out any emissions at all. I mean, that's going to be a major development, right? That could change the world of motoring, let alone motorsport. And so many developments. In Europe, we wouldn't have the ICAP. The ICAP rating for NCAP rating, for cars.
Yeah.
Right? The safety ratings, right? In Europe, that have saved, thousands and thousands and thousands of lives have been saved by the European NCAP ratings on cars, right? Because car manufacturers have just developed and developed and developed safety so that they can all get the 5-star NCAP rating. That NCAP system was introduced from Formula One. It was Max Mosley who pushed that through when he was president of the FIA. He championed that project. It didn't exist before. Cars were dangerous. Road cars, your car, my car, was dangerous to drive. Right? If you had an accident, you were very likely to be severely hurt. Nowadays, not so because of the NCAP. And that came from Formula One crash testing technology. And that came because Max Mosley pushed it through and championed it and invented it, in fact. So there's a lot of good stories out there, Dens. And, I don't want to be the person sitting here going, how shit Formula One is because there are no women in it, right? Because there's lots of ways that Formula One needs to evolve and adapt and develop, isn't there, for the new audiences and for the new world? But let's not forget what the good it's done as well, right?
Absolutely, there, Kate. And I think this is the productive part of the balance of the conversation, because we're not saying that F1's terrible and it's a means to ends and that it's the black kind of Sabbath of the world as such, But having said that, what we are saying, is that there is room for improvement, and there can be things that can be done, and that's technically what Formula One's always been about from its inception. It's about kind of like finding the honesty in the time, in trying to beat the stopwatch, in trying to find solutions to problems, and evolving concepts and philosophies and ideas beyond even that. So, it's really interesting just to hear all of the kind of like advancement stuff taking place over the year, and even the stuff like you mentioned, like with the NCAP rating. It's something which a lot of us take for granted, but had it not been for Formula One and the strenuous crash testing that cars would have been through in the late 80s and 90s to make them more safe after the loss of Ayrton Senna and all of these stars that we look up to, like it's very different in the world of just the automotive industry too. So there's a lot that we could thank F1 for, and a lot of credit needs to be given to that as well. So I 100% agree with you. And then, talking about another kind of era of time, Kate, as well, you talked about the Liberty Media takeover from like 2017 onwards. And almost at that time as well, how would you describe it from both sides in terms of, was Bernie sad almost to kind of like move on? Did he appreciate maybe that, the sport maybe was growing quicker than perhaps he could manage? Or on top of that as well, when Liberty Media first came on board, was everybody kind of on board with them too? Or was there maybe a perception that, this kind of like group, they were going to come in and maybe change the philosophy of the sport into something that, wasn't what the sport was at the time? How did people perceive that initially?
I think, I hope nobody's listening to this, because I'll tell you, how it really happened. But Bernie was effectively booted out. He didn't leave voluntarily. The shares in Formula One were owned by CVC Capital, not Bernie. He had some, but the majority was owned by CVC Capital, private equity, and they sold those shares to Liberty Media. So Bernie wasn't really involved in that. It was just done. And so it was a pretty overnight, it was an overnight thing. We were in Bernie's offices one day, and the next day he was gone. He said, "I'm out. I'm leaving." And in came Liberty. Of course, what do you think everyone's going to think? Everyone's going to be a bit worried, a bit frightened. Who are these people? They're American. What are they going to think? But Liberty are really smart people. They have all the best of the qualities that you would get from an American business, and that means that they are supremely optimistic. They are very can-do. So, if I wanted to do one new thing with Bernie in hospitality, I would have to go and pitch to him 10 things, because I knew he was going to say no to 9 of them, and I'd get one through. Right, and that's because he had very high standards, and he was very, very rigorous. So if you go and pitch something to Bernie, he would pull holes in it almost before you finish speaking. He would see what the downside or the danger was. He could see it before you could. He would spot the weakness in a proposition a bit too quickly, right? Which made it a bit risk averse. It was a bit like, unless you can be 100% bulletproof sure of what you're doing and why you're doing it and what the benefits are and what you're going to make out of it, then it wouldn't happen, right? Liberty had a completely different approach, and that was, look, this is a sleeping giant here. Formula One is a sleeping giant with millions of fans around the world who just want more. Should we do something really, really radical, and should we just give the fans some more of what they want? And it was like, oh my God, shock horror. But you felt it, don't you? Were there. That's what happened. Social media opened up, and basically they said to all of us as directors, they said, you've got your departments, you've got your divisions, go and do what you need to do to grow this business and to grow the fan base, right? Very hands off. We'll leave you to it. Just go and do whatever it is you need to do. And in that sense, we were kind of unshackled. I was unshackled, and I went a bit nuts, actually. I didn't need to be asked twice, put it that way. And because I had a whole stack of projects I wanted to do, because they were all the ones that Bernie had said no to. So I was up and ready to go. And that's what happened. So it was a completely different culture, completely different. And a lot of people in Formula One were worried about it at the time. They wondered whether, oh, God, are the Americans going to dumb down Formula One? Is it all going to become a bit NASCAR? But I think they soon got over that and realised that a lot of the new stuff. I mean, one of the first things we did with Liberty, I remember this very, very well. So now that I'm sat at my desk with Liberty and they've said, do whatever you need to do, I was like a kid in a sweet shop. I got a phone call from somebody I know who works at Disney, and they said, hey, we've got a new Cars movie coming out. I think it was Cars 3, or was it Cars 2? I can't remember.
Mhm.
And they said, you know, can we kind of work with you, work with Silverstone, work with you and put something on at Silverstone? Maybe we'll do a private preview of the movie, put a tent up somewhere or something like that. Do something. And yeah, I said, yes, absolutely, yes, yes, yes. And, you know, yep, let's do something. And we chatted it through, and I said, do you know what? You know, rather than just doing a preview, kind of like a premiere of the film, I said, why don't we just turn a garage into a Cars 3 garage? I said, have you got a life-size, like, you know, Lightning McQueen car, like a full-size one?
Mhm.
And they were like, yeah, we've got one somewhere. I said, why don't we just mock up a garage, but just like make it Cars garage with Lightning McQueen in the garage, in one of the Formula One garages? And they were like, God, is that even possible? Can we do that? I said, I don't know. Should we try? And we did do it. And we 2017 at Silverstone, we had this like Cars garage with Lightning McQueen and what's his name, Owen Wilson came over, you know, and he went on the podium and all that. And I was really, really worried about it. The garage was being built, and it was beautiful. They did a beautiful job. It was just like walking into the Cars movie, you know, cartoon movie. And I was really worried about the doors in the garage going up for the first time on the Friday at Silverstone, because I thought all of the people I respect in Formula One, the team owners, the team principals, the drivers, all the top swanky people in Formula One, I thought they're gonna really hate this. They're gonna think this is dumbing down Formula One to have one of their, you know, hallowed garages turned into a cartoon garage, you know, during a race weekend. I was really worried. I thought the reaction to it might be a bit, you know, adverse. I mean, I knew the fans would love it and TV would love it, but I didn't know whether the insiders in Formula One would think this was a step too far. And I couldn't have been more wrong. Every single team principal came into that garage and wanted a picture with the life-size Lightning McQueen car, you know, and Owen Wilson, of course. And and it was, you know, it was, Formula One was like, yeah, okay, the world, you know, the sky's not going to fall in just because we try something new, right? So that was when I first knew it was all going to be all right. You know, we can do new stuff and we can evolve as a sport. We can change, and I still think we can now. So it's a good thing, isn't it?
Absolutely, you know, and like you mentioned as well, Kate, it must have been like a really daunting period of time when, you know, like the change happened, and then like Liberty said, right, away you guys, go into the Wild West, try out all these ideas, give it your best shot, and then, you know, like the implications or almost the feedback you're going to get off the teams internally as to whether or not some of the ideas would be good. I could imagine being really kind of like scary, but you know, it shows that I think in this day and age, a lot of us have to kind of welcome change and to not be afraid of it and to at least give it a try. And even with stuff like that, it's huge. I remember actually watching the original, like, first Cars movie as a kid, and Michael Schumacher being like one of the extras at the end of the movie, and that, like, it stuck with me. Like from that day onwards, Cars like one of my favorite films, and I love Lightning McQueen. So, you know, to have that interaction with between the sport and, you know, like the younger generation, the younger fans, and even just the teams to endorse it and to, you know, like make that part of it as well, I think is super key. And it's amazing as well to kind of see that the perspective and all the, also the attitude has kind of changed, because I think people have like a perception of Formula One being like a all boys club as such, and like it's very exclusive and very swanky, but actually over the years, like, it's already started to take steps to be quite inclusive and quite diverse, and, you know, willing to kind of tackle any challenge from any angle, which I think is always quite refreshing to see, Kate. So I love that kind of perspective and that
Well, I
story.
think that, but I think that, you know what, Dance, I think the whole, I mean, you know, not just a woman Formula One world champion, not just women driving in motorsport or in Formula One, but the whole, I think the diversity challenge is one of the biggest that the sport faces right now, because you know, the world has moved on. It's moved on, and we need to make sure that Formula One moves on with it, and that we are aligned and in step with our new audience. And you know, they call them, don't they, the Netflix audience, right? The new audience that Formula One's had through the Drive to Survive, right? It's got millions and millions of new fans of Formula One. And they're not like you, Dens. They haven't been watching it since they were kids, and you know, on their mum or their dad's knee. They're new to it, right? They're new to it. And guess what? If the sport doesn't make them feel welcome and doesn't give them what they want, they'll just go and do something else, right? They'll go to Coachella next year instead. They'll decide they like that and not go to Formula One. So the sport has an opportunity now to appeal to that entirely new generation, and a lot of them are women, young women, and they want more from the sport than it's doing right now. I told you, we did this big piece of research for More Than Equal, and we surveyed the fans, and the majority of them were these new Netflix generation, and we had the highest proportion of female respondents than any survey has ever had. So we got a very good view on what this new fan base is thinking, and particularly the fastest growing area of the fan base in Formula One is women. What do they want from Formula One? And the sport is falling short on not just gender, but all areas on diversity. And you know, Lewis, you know, look at what Lewis has been saying this for years, of course. And he's put a lot of money behind trying to address it and make change. But you know, across the sport, diversity and inclusion is something that needs to be tackled root and branch, and seriously and meaningfully, in order to keep in step with the audience on this, with the public on this. You know, the world has moved on, and we need to move on with it. And there's a danger if we don't, that we'll turn off a lot of fans. The opportunity, if we do, is massive, isn't it? Is to grow a sport that has a truly inclusive fan base, inclusive in working in the sport, you know, across the board. And I think that that's what we should be fighting for right now.
I 110% agree with you, Kay. And I love the commitment, and also kind of just the outline there as well of as to what the goal is and what needs to be done, you know, for Formula One to continue to remain kind of like relevant to, you know, the wider audience. And it has that opportunity because, like you mentioned as well, it's the one sport where every race we're somewhere new. You know, we're in a completely new continent sometimes as well. These days as well, there's a huge push for like 25 races you know, at a time, whereas back in kind of like my day, I think it was just like 14 races. So it's continued to evolve and continue to change, and I'm glad that, you know, the landscape's changing. You mentioned Lewis Hamilton as well, and he's got so many great causes like the Mission 44 campaign as well, which is again kind of like a organization based reaching out to kids and trying to understand kind of the reasoning why, you know, there's not so many kids in STEM subjects, and kind of giving them the opportunities and the branches to, you know, make that step into the world of, you know, motorsport, Formula One, and just to kind of grow with the sport as well, which I think is key because, you know, the kids of, well, tomorrow are the kids of the future, you know, and I think to have the platform and the foundation there, so when they're old enough to kind of execute and to be part of it, I think is really neat and something quite promising for the future as well.
Yeah, exactly. But you know, if you're a young girl, what makes you want to go karting if you don't see any role models, any women racing? You know, if you're a black kid, what makes you want to go and be an engineer if you don't ever see any of them, or a driver or a team principal? I want to run a Formula One team. Well, if you've never seen anyone that looks anything like you doing that, it's that's going to stop you dreaming and imagining from an early age. and that's bad, isn't it? That's bad on any level. You shouldn't be limiting the aspirations of kids just because they can't see themselves doing that thing.
Absolutely, and that's the thing as well. Like, the message should be that the world for them should be their oyster, and ultimately, like, the more that they see kind of like people like themselves, or kind of like examples of people like themselves in the fields that they want to be, I think it acts more as a catalyst for inspiring them and giving them motivation and aspirations to join them and to work towards it, and perhaps even surpass them. So I think it's super key, and there's so much work behind it already happening behind the scenes, with great campaigns as well, such as More Than Equal. But of course, it's us as the listeners and fans and consumers as well that can have a huge hand in that as well, Kate. So I 100% agree with you. And kind of onto a new topic, Kate, before we wrap the show up, I think we'd be remiss if we didn't kind of ask you this as well. What would you say are your top 3 favorite, like, Formula One Paddock Club kind of experiences, or still stories, or just, have there been any exciting moments or kind of encounters with celebrities that are quite funny that you could like retell our audience?
Oh, there've been so many, Den, so many. I mean, really, really good stuff. So, I take it from 2017 when Liberty came in. One of the first things that I introduced in the Paddock Club was the truck tours, right? Mm-hmm. And this is where, sometimes a lot of your listeners might not know this because the TV coverage isn't that early, but before the race starts, the drivers all get on the back of a flatbed truck, and it drives them around the circuit, and usually with Sky TV or somebody on there, and they wave to all the fans in the grandstand, so that every fan in every grandstand gets to have, a look at the drivers as they drive by, and they're all just standing on the back of this flatbed truck. Those flatbed trucks, by the way, in Europe are the ones that bring all the kit and equipment. So they're loaded up with containers. Those are taken off to build the broadcast centre, right? And then it just leaves the flatbed, and then they adapt that, they stick some railings on it, and they use that to drive the drivers around to wave to the crowds before a race. And I saw that truck just sit in a car park, sitting there doing nothing in a car park. And so I said, I kind of borrowed it. So I got the driver and I said, could you just drive me around the track so that I can stand on the back of it to see what it's like? So he drove me around. It was in Bahrain, actually. And it was beautiful. The sun was going down. It was warm. And the truckie, he drove me around the circuit, 25 miles an hour, around Bahrain. And just because I just wanted to see what it was like. And it was amazing. Like, in all these years in Formula One, I had never actually gone round on the track in Bahrain. I didn't get how steep some of those, elevations are. Mm-hmm. It was incredible. I just got a whole new perspective on the circuit. And don't forget, I'm not even a fan, and I got excited. So I was like, well, if I'm not a fan and I can get excited, this is cool. So I just thought it was really cool to drive around the track and see. I was amazed at how high some of the curbs are. If you go over that in the truck, you feel it. And I was thinking, God, you don't really see that on television, how high those curbs are. You don't see how steep some of the elevations are at some of the tracks. It looks a bit computer game-ish when you watch it on telly. But when you're there, it's a whole different perspective. So I thought, right, I'm going to use that truck. I'm going to take VIP guests of the Paddock Club on the back of that truck. And I'll get a young racing driver to commentate all the way around and tell us what corner this is, why it's important, how fast they'll be going into this corner and out of it, and all of that. So I did that, and I think I had 12 guests the first time round. And in fact, I couldn't persuade anyone to do it. They were all up there in the Paddock Club having lovely hospitality and champagne. And I was like, do you want to come and stand on the back of a truck with me and go around the circuit? And they were like, nah. I'm good, thanks. Have another glass of champagne. But I persuaded 12 of them to come on with me. And it was brilliant, and they loved it. And then the next time we did it, there were instead of 12, there were 24, and then it was 48, and then it just got out of control. And now there are 5 trucks that go round for the Paddock Club guests to go round and stand on the back of this truck, and it is brilliant. One of the best ones I ever did was I did it for a VIP guest of ours, who's a really good guy. He came to lots of races, called Mike Krieger. And he is the chief tech. He's one of the founders of Instagram.
Wow.
Right? And he is American, obviously, West Coast American, but his father's Brazilian. So he was brought up right, watching Formula One as a kid, which was quite unusual in America then. But his father was, really into Formula One because he was Brazilian. So he'd been brought up with Formula One. He wanted to come to a race, so he came to a race, and he came with his dad. And it was like a, father-son weekend for them. And of course, it's Mike Krieger. He founded Instagram. Like, of course I'm going to look after him. So we looked after him in the Paddock Club, and, it was all lovely hospitality. And they were having such a nice time together. And I said, Mike, you've got to come on the truck tour. You'll love it. Okay. So came down, gets on the back of a truck. Sam Power, young racing driver, ex-Porsche driver, commentated all the way around. And went round. This was in Montreal, I think. Went round the circuit. And he got off the truck at the end of it. And he said, this is the best weekend of my life. And I was like, geez, that's Mike Krieger. He's like a billionaire founder of Instagram. And he just stood on the back of a truck and said it's the best weekend of his life. Okay, that's good. I'll take that. I'll take that. So, that's really rewarding. I think that kind of thing is really rewarding. But we've had some great celebrities. I mean, we get all the VIPs in the Paddock Club. We've had some great celebrities. We had Bill Clinton in Austin.
Wow.
Oh my God. If I think he's the person I've met who's got the most charisma of anyone. You know what I mean? Charisma. When you go in a room and there's somebody important in there, even if you can't see them. It's like an atmosphere around some people. He was really, really brilliant. He was a great guest to have, and loved having him there. And do you know what he did that was really nice? And by the way, this was when people weren't watching as well. He would say personal thank yous to every single member of the serving staff, and he'd talk to them. I thought that was really nice. I mean, I guess he's a politician, so he would. But I figured there was a bit of genuineness there. There was a real charm about him. But I think there was a bit of genuineness there because I saw him doing it even when people weren't watching. He scooted off to go to the loo, and I happened to see him walking down the corridor, and he just had one security guy with the Secret Service. But somebody, stopped to tell him the way, and he stopped and had a chat with him. This was just, one of the junior staff. I like that. That's really nice. It's really good to see. So we had good celebrities and we had bad celebrities. But most of the celebrities we had were really good. Some of them, I mean, if they're really precious and, they kind of don't get invited again. But the majority of them just love the sport. They just love the sport. And if they're not fans of the sport, they get to love it. So like Owen Wilson came for Silverstone for Cars, right? And Disney brought him in. The helicopter, and he was there to promote the Cars movie. And our head of production came to me and he said, hey, what do you think about getting Owen Wilson to do the podium? Because it wasn't planned. They just kind of thought, well, he's there anyway. Maybe he could do the podium, especially if Lewis wins, because Lewis, I think, was part of the voiceover in this Cars movie, wasn't he? So they said, do you think he'd do it? And I said, well, I'll go and ask him. So I go over and he's having lunch, and I sit down with him and having a chat. And I'm saying, do you want to do the podium? I think he had one of his publicists there. And he was like, well, I don't know a lot about Formula One. And I was like, you don't need to know a lot. You just, all you need to know is who won, because that's who you're giving the cup to, right? So it's really easy. You don't need to know much. And his publicist was like, no, this wasn't in the schedule. We can't do this. It's, it's not a good idea. We haven't prepped for it or anything. I said, it's such a shame. Anyway, so the publicist went off to go to the bathroom. Mm-hmm. So I took my up chair, sat down with him, and I went, oh, go on. I said, this will just, I said, they will love you out there. And, this was literally, we were about 10 minutes before the podium. And I said, Lewis is going to be up there. I said, you've really got to do this. I said, they will love you out there. And he was really relaxed. He was really laid back. He said, oh, okay then. So I grabbed him before his publicist could get back from the bathroom. I grabbed him and took him down the secret back corridor and shoved him onto the podium. And That's how it happened. And his publicist, I think, went a bit nuts. But there we are.
Okay, that's legendary. Honestly, like Owen Wilson being snuck in to do a podium kind of presentation is the sort of thing I really needed to hear, because that's super cool. And just to imagine his reaction as well. And I imagine he would have probably played it down pretty cool, but probably on the inside he's quite nervous. But then
yeah, I think it was. It's hard. It's funny, isn't it? You get a major celebrity and they're a bit nervous. And like, get out of here.
True, they should be used to it, no? But like again, like I can imagine with so many people at Silverstone, and then the drivers as well. And I mean, Lewis, I guess, is the easier one to go for, but some of them can be a bit more mean or a bit more kind of like sharp in their responses.
Yeah, exactly.
But, I think that was like a great opportunity for him, and I'm glad that he actually stood up for the opportunity and took it as well, because it's given us that really awesome story, Kate. So thank you for that. And also, Kate, again, thank you for your time. We're almost at the end of the episode, but Kate, you've been an amazing guest. You've really given us a lot of insight as well into the world of F1. And what I really enjoyed about this episode was that you've kind of been in F1 from the times where like it was very kind of commercial and very, how would I say, kind of male testosterone, kind of like guys kind of being very egotistical and whatnot. But now we're in a kind of time and place where the focus is different, the attention is different, the needs and demands are all different, and we're kind of working towards like a sport that's more sustainable, and of course as well more diverse and more inclusive as well. So Kate, for all our listeners out there as well, where can they find you? And also, is there a website as well for the campaign in relation to More Than Equal?
Yes, there is. You can go to morethanequal.com. You can even download the 60-page research report we did. If you've got any problems with insomnia, I recommend it. But it is really good. Seriously, it's a really, really good piece of research. You can also register there as a supporter of ours, and we'll send you newsletters when we get our act together to produce them, which will be very soon. So please do. And as I said before, if you don't register with us for your support, which is fine, go and find some young drivers, some young female talent, and give them some love, because they need it. They really, really do. And not only that, but they appreciate it too. They will really appreciate your listeners getting behind them a bit. So yeah, look at that. I'm on Instagram myself. I'm a big fan of Instagram. And so I'm at Instagram under Kate_Bevan. And my cats have got their own Instagram account in case anyone wants to follow them as well. I think their content is better than mine, I think, but there we are. So please do follow us. We absolutely love to have the support of everyone for this.
Thank you so much for that, Kate. And like we've mentioned as well, we implore you to go and check out Kate's social media as well, and on top of that as well, the More Than Equal website, to have a look at the report as well, because of course I bet you there's some alarming statistics and a lot of interesting empirical data and research that's been put together in that report too. So something I'll definitely be reading on my train journeys and commutes to work. But Kate, as always, just thank you so much for your time. I was actually already saying to Georgina that we'd have to get you back for a second episode, maybe like a live episode with the web cameras and like more of an interactive thing with our fans as well, so they could check in some live questions. But you've been a superb guest.
That would be fun, wouldn't it? Yeah, let's do it. Let's go live.
That'd be brilliant. We'll definitely arrange it soon enough. And Kate, again, just thank you so much for your time. It means the world to me. You're our star of the day, so we really appreciate it. And guys, if you enjoyed this episode, please make sure you hit the like button and you subscribe and you share with all of your friends and connections as well. It really helps the podcast grow. If you're new, I hope that you took away as much from this episode as I did, as always, because we have some really amazing guests, and we're so thankful to our founder Georgina as well for organizing this and for for giving us the opportunity. So, guys, please, the least you could do is at least like and share. And please check out as well morethanequal.com as well to get behind them and the great work that they're doing. And until next time, it's been your boy AMG Dents, aka Smooth Operator. I'm gonna start singing. Until next time, on the next episode, we'll catch you soon. Please take it easy, and we'll catch you again. Bye for now.